Western society has accepted as unquestionable a technological imperative that is quite as arbitrary as the most primitive taboo. Not merely the duty to foster invention and constantly to create technological novelties, but equally the duty to surrender to these novelties unconditionally just because they are offered, without respect to their human consequences. And this week's opening quote comes from Lewis Mumford. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Maxwell Igan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I will be your host for the next hour. Now, on last week's radio broadcast, I spoke to you quite a bit about technology. I spoke to you about technocracy and the danger that is seen in us surrendering ourselves to such technology unconditionally the way we do. And it's true, folks. What I spoke about last week, the technocracy that is actually being rolled out around us while we haven't been looking, is really a major part of the problem. And it's very insidious because it is part of the problem that people just don't seem to notice. People truly believe that all the technology that comes to them is purely for a matter of convenience because people invent better things. But really, it isn't like that at all, folks. There's actually a quite dark agenda behind the entire technological push. Not that technology is bad or is bad for us. It's simply those who control the technology have nefarious purposes in mind. And it isn't that we're going to suddenly find ourselves enslaved to our technology or anything like that. It's just that there's a dark agenda behind the whole thing. And the technology is already doing what it's designed to do, and that is providing a comprehensive database to the powers that believe they be, in as much as they can track all our movements, they can track all our purchases, they can track all our friendships, and they can virtually figure out what we're doing at any given time of the day, and gain a very comprehensive social, psychological and economic profile on every person in society who happens to use technology. And to carry out the depopulation plan and the control plan, they don't really need to run out and arrest great masses of people. All you really need to do is keep raising the cost of living. And this is something that I've spoken to you about many times in the past as well. I mean, folks, what we're seeing here is a system that gradually works its way up the food chain and discards the population in the process. More and more people get discarded all the time, and that's the way they control people. That's the way they clean up the streets, shall we say. That's the way they lower the population in the cities, lower the population. They just keep raising the cost of living. More and more people get discarded. More and more people become homeless. And, of course, during all this process, we find laws that come into place to criminalise homelessness, to just clean the streets up and get rid of all of these terrible homeless riffraff everywhere that are disturbing all the well-to-do people. The well-to-do people, of course, don't realise that they will soon be thrown on that homeless pile as well, and then they will be cleaned up and they will be taken to the camps and the prisons and the lockdown facilities and the homeless shelters, as they're called, that people seem to find it very difficult to leave from once they arrive there. And that's how it's done, folks. We've got an economic model that discards the population as it climbs its way up the food chain and up the social hierarchy. And that's the way it goes. I've been talking about this since as far back as 2008, 2009. And this is exactly what we're seeing in our countries today. We're seeing laws come in the United States and in England and in Australia that are seeking to criminalise homelessness. And, of course, people are thinking, well, this is a good idea. We don't want to have these terrible, disgusting homeless people running around everywhere. But they don't seem to realise that the homeless situation and the homeless people and the plight of the homeless people has been created by the government themselves in their unbridled support for the corrupt and privately run economic system which has created the homeless situation on this planet to begin with. And that is a real problem, folks. The problem is that the governments are creating the homeless people themselves And they are doing so very deliberately by their support for this corrupt economic model and economic system, this debt-based currency which is designed by its very nature to steal the wealth of the planet and discard the population in the process. And again, they convince the public into letting them put a band-aid on the symptom, and that is clean up the streets of the homeless people and put them in shelters, in inverted commas. But what these shelters appear to be, more than anything, are detention centres where these people are being taken. And of course the public is quite happy for the government to put a band-aid on this symptom as long as they don't have to look at it, but they're not really talking about addressing the root core of the problem which has created the homeless situation to begin with, and that is, of course, the corrupt, megalomaniacal psychopaths who populate Western governments. These, of course, are the same psychopaths that create all the wars. These are the same psychopaths that are allowing 6 million people to be facing starvation in Yemen at the moment, along with another 16 million people who are currently without water. And of course, many people even support the action that's going on in Yemen and support what's going on in Iraq and support the many wars because they believe that we must go and fight terrorism, because that's what they believe it is, when ultimately the terrorism that is being carried out in Yemen and many other places is being carried out by governments. In fact, the people of Yemen are suffering a brutal terrorist assault by the terrorist forces of Saudi Arabia at the moment. The problem is that the terrorist forces of Saudi Arabia are dressed in uniform and are using military equipment, and so they are viewed as being a legitimate force of soldiers. But really what soldiers are large government-sponsored terrorist forces which go into countries and decimate them before our eyes. And of course the people approve of it because the people are misinformed about the true state of the world, and they're misinformed about the purposes of these wars, and they're misinformed about what happens during these wars, the same way they're misinformed about the situation that has created the homeless crisis on the planet and the situation that is allowing the rollout of this very controlling technology. This is happening because people are grossly misinformed because of the criminals. And yes, I say criminals, the psychopathic, barefaced, lying criminals who populate the mainstream media, the largest propaganda force of disinformation and mind control that consciousness ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth. These are the cockroaches and psychopaths that populate the mainstream media. And that is really the big problem that we face, folks. The mainstream media is one of the biggest problems that this world faces today, because the liars and criminals who populate the mainstream media have sold the lie to the world. They've sold terrorism to the world under the guise of humanitarianism. They've sold wars to the world under the guise of peace. They've sold theft and the discarding of the population to the world under the guise of austerity. They've sold poison and disease and autism to the world under the guise of supporting health in their vaccination programs. They've sold disinformation and sterility and genetic modification to the world by their support of corrupt organisations such as Monsanto. They've failed to question and even ridiculed the aerial spraying that constantly takes place in our skies. They've sold lies and supported terrorism and covered up the truth and covered up the real perpetrators and who the real terrorists are on the 9/11 attacks. They've sold a disinformative and controlled and indoctrinatory education system to the public. They've sold division to the public. They've sold lie after lie after lie to this world. And they have committed the most serious crimes of any entity that has ever existed on this planet, because without the propaganda that is pushed on the hapless public by the liars who populate the mainstream media, none of the problems that we face on this earth could exist. If the people who populated the mainstream media simply told the truth and looked at things in an unbiased manner and brought real information to the world, we could heal things very quickly, and in fact the world would never have deteriorated to the state that it is. Yes, folks, the best thing you can do for your future is to throw your television out the window. And don't look up to these media personalities as celebrities, folks, because they're not celebrities. They're lower than the lowest form of rodent, the lowest form of insect. And you can't hate them for it, folks, because they're either programmed to do what they do or they're just psychopaths. And either way, then they're just doing what they do. And so you can't hate them for it, but what you got to do is call it for what it is and stop buying into their lies, stop buying into their disinformation, stop looking up to these morons and these psychopaths, stop looking up to your slave masters, and stop living in a state of Stockholm syndrome, which is what we have. The entire population seems to have Stockholm syndrome. What we've got to do, folks, is call things for what they are and stand up and make a difference ourselves, but make sure you examine things for yourself, folks, and don't just buy into the lies and propaganda that is fed to you by the mainstream news services. Throw your television away and call things for what they are. Now, you may be out there listening to this today and thinking that Max sounds quite angry today. And there's a reason for that, folks, and that is because I am angry. I'm angry because I'm tired of seeing my brothers and sisters around the world slaughtered in the many wars that we see around the planet because of the media's failure to present the facts to people. I'm angry and annoyed at what I'm seeing in Yemen, seeing my brothers and sisters in Yemen being slaughtered. I'm angry at seeing 6 million people facing starvation in Yemen and 16 million people living without water at the moment in Yemen. And Saudi Arabia is, of course, bombing Yemen and carrying out all these atrocities in between beheadings at home. They're such a progressive and civilized nation, which I guess is why they're a Western ally, and that annoys me no end. I'm annoyed at the media's failure to put that in the perspective that it needs to be placed in. I'm annoyed and angry at the fact that the war on terror even exists, because if the media had done their job on 9/11 and actually presented the truth to people and reported the facts to people and presented an unbiased version of reality to people rather than simply towing the government line, there would be no war on terror. There would have been no invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan. There would be no war in Syria. None of the mess we see in the Middle East would happen had the media done their job and quashed the war on terror before it was contrived and begun. We would not see Israel carrying out the atrocities it's carrying out against the Palestinian people and getting away with them constantly were it not for the support of the mainstream media. We would not see the amount of children getting autism from vaccines were it not for the media pushing the vaccination programs rather than offering an unbiased report of what is actually in the vaccinations and what the problems may be with getting your child vaccinated. They simply toe the government line and they push autism on the public. None of these problems would exist if we had an honest and unbiased media rather than the corrupt government-run institution that we have now. And I am tired of seeing my brothers and sisters around the world brutalized by this corporate system of debt slavery, and I'm tired of the media promoting it. We wouldn't have any of these problems if the media was an honest organisation that actually did their jobs, folks. And as I said before, propaganda, especially propaganda of war, is the worst crime. It is the most serious international crime. And the reason it is the most serious international crime is because without war propaganda, then none of the other crimes that occur during wartime could happen. There could be no ethnic cleansing, there could be no genocide, there could be no use of dime ammunition, experimental ammunition, white phosphorus. There could be no illegal invasions of foreign countries were it not for the fervour that is whipped up by the media and the lies that are presented to the public to justify these invasions, such as what we saw with Iraq. None of this could happen were it not for the propaganda pushed on the public by the criminal institutions we know as the modern mainstream media. I mean, let's face it, folks, the entire war on terror is based completely on propaganda, and the whole thing wouldn't have happened and would never exist if it wasn't for the media selling it to the public. And folks, you know, it's frustrating. It gets really frustrating because we could change the world so very quickly if we could just reach enough people. And the way to reach people effectively is, of course, via newspaper and television, because that's what people are addicted to. But you cannot get the media to promote the truth or bring the truth to the people at all. All the media does is sell them down the river and sell the slavery system to the public. And it's grossly irresponsible, folks, and that is hugely frustrating for me, because we could change the world so very quickly if we could simply get the word out to people and help them wake up to reality. And a big problem in that regard is the mainstream media and the lies they feed the people and their willingness to toe the government line at whatever the cost.